Imagine being forced to marry your sworn enemy, the very person your family has battled for generations. That's exactly what happened to the heirs of two powerful mafia empires. What starts as a desperate act to end a bloody war quickly unravels into a dangerous game of hearts, where loyalty is tested and forbidden desires ignite amidst a world of shadows.
I'm on a mission to show that our stories carry weight. My mother doubted I'd reach 500 subscribers, but your support for Bliss Tales proves that LGBT love stories have a place in everyone's hearts. Subscribe and help me keep these beautiful tales alive. Back to the video.
In the underbelly of the city, where skyscrapers cast long shadows over blood-stained streets, two families have ruled with iron fists for over 50 years. The Corsanos and the Volkovs. Oil and water. Fire and ice. Their rivalry wasn't just business. It was personal. It was generational. It was written in the scars of their soldiers and the graves of their fallen. Every territory dispute ended in gunfire. Every negotiation dissolved into threats. The war between them had claimed countless lives, destroyed empires within empires, and painted the city red more times than anyone cared to count. But wars, even cold ones, eventually demand a price too steep to pay. By the winter of 2025, both families had lost too much. Key soldiers. Strategic territories. Millions in revenue. The old patriarchs, weathered by decades of conflict, finally acknowledged a brutal truth: if they continued this path, there would be nothing left to rule. No empire. No legacy. Only ashes. And so, in a smoke-filled room where enemies became reluctant allies, a solution was proposed. Not a truce written on paper. Not a ceasefire bound by empty promises. But a union. A marriage. The binding of bloodlines through the most ancient contract known to man. The chosen sacrifices. Dante Corsano and Damian Volkov. The heirs. The princes of their respective kingdoms. Two young men who had been raised to despise each other's very existence. Dante Corsano was fire incarnate. 26 years old, with eyes like molten amber and a smile that could charm or cut depending on his mood. He'd been groomed since childhood to take over the Corsano Empire, taught that strength meant never showing weakness, that mercy was a luxury their world couldn't afford. He was his father's pride, his family's future, and he wore that burden like armor. The thought of marrying a Volkov made his blood boil. To him, this wasn't a solution. It was surrender. Damian Volkov was the opposite in every visible way, yet cut from the same unforgiving cloth. 28 years old, with storm-gray eyes and a composure that made him seem untouchable. Where Dante burned hot, Damian ran cold. Calculated. Precise. He'd survived assassination attempts before his 18th birthday and had learned that emotion was a weakness enemies exploited. The Volkovs had taught him that power came from control, and the idea of being controlled through marriage, especially to a Corsano, felt like a cage closing around him. The engagement was announced on a frozen January evening in 2026, in a neutral location, a historic estate that had witnessed countless deals and betrayals. Security was suffocating. Armed guards from both families lined the halls, hands never far from their weapons, eyes tracking every movement. When Dante and Damian were brought face to face for the first time as intended husbands, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. They didn't shake hands. Didn't speak. Just sized each other up like predators forced to share territory, calculating weaknesses, mapping vulnerabilities. Dante saw everything he'd been taught to hate. A Volkov. The bloodline responsible for his uncle's death. For the ambush that left his cousin paralyzed. For years of stolen shipments and sabotaged deals. Damian saw his mirror image in enemy colors. A Corsano. The family that had killed his mentor. That had burned down 3 of their warehouses. That represented everything standing between him and the freedom to choose his own path. Their fathers made speeches about unity and strength. About building something greater than either family alone. The words rang hollow in the vast hall, echoing off marble floors that had seen more honest bloodshed than this facade of peace. The wedding was set for 6 weeks later. Just enough time to make arrangements. Not enough time to find a way out. The early days of their marriage were arctic. They were given a penthouse, neutral territory, decorated with absurd luxury that neither of them cared about. Separate bedrooms. Shared living spaces that became battlegrounds of silent warfare. Public appearances were mandatory. Charity galas where they had to play the devoted couple. Business meetings where their unity was meant to symbolize the merger of empires. They stood side by side, Dante's hand on Damian's lower back, Damian's fingers intertwined with Dante's, all while their smiles never reached their eyes. Behind closed doors, they were strangers bound by contract. Dante threw himself into work, taking conference calls at midnight, reviewing territory reports until dawn, anything to avoid the suffocating reality of his situation. Damian maintained his routine with mechanical precision, training at 5 a.m., meetings throughout the day, returning to the penthouse only when absolutely necessary. When they did occupy the same space, the air crackled with tension. Dante would make pointed comments about Volkov incompetence. Damian would respond with cutting observations about Corsano recklessness. Neither would give an inch. Both determined to prove they hadn't been broken by this arrangement. But proximity has a way of eroding even the strongest walls. It started small. Dante noticed that Damian took his coffee black, no sugar, scalding hot. That he had a tell when he was frustrated, a slight tension in his jaw. That despite his cold exterior, he never raised his voice at the household staff and actually learned all their names. Damian observed that Dante's bravado was loudest when he was uncertain. That he had nightmares he'd never admit to, evidenced by the light in his room at 3 a.m. That beneath the swagger was someone who read philosophy and collected vintage records, someone more complex than the hothead his reputation suggested. The cracks appeared on a night in late February. A rival family, seeing opportunity in the Corsano-Volkov alliance, made their move. An attempted hit at a restaurant where Dante and Damian were dining, maintaining appearances for the watching world. The bullets came through the window. Glass exploded. Chaos erupted. In that split second, instinct overrode animosity. Dante threw himself toward Damian, not away. Damian's hand found Dante's collar, pulling him down behind the table, shielding him with his own body. Their security eliminated the threat within seconds, but those seconds changed something fundamental. In the car ride home, hands still trembling with adrenaline, they sat closer than necessary. Dante's usual commentary died in his throat. Damian's calculated composure had fractures. That night, for the first time, they shared a drink in their living room. Not as enemies. Not quite as friends. But as two people who just survived something together. The conversation started safe. The incompetence of the rival family. The need for better security protocols. But bourbon has a way of loosening tongues, and the hour was late enough that defenses were low. Dante admitted he'd wanted to be an architect. Before the family. Before the legacy. Before his choices were made for him at birth. Damian confessed that he tried to run away once, at 17. Made it as far as the airport before his father's men brought him back. He'd never tried again. They were both prisoners of their bloodlines long before this marriage. At least now, they were prisoners together. The shift was gradual but undeniable. Working sessions became less antagonistic. Dante would ask Damian's opinion on territorial disputes, genuinely listening to his strategic insights. Damian found himself seeking Dante's input on family politics, valuing his ability to read people. They discovered they were formidable together. Dante's instincts combined with Damian's planning created solutions neither family had managed alone. Negotiations that would have ended in bloodshed instead concluded with handshakes. Territories were consolidated. Revenue increased. The marriage, meant to be symbolic, was actually working. But something else was working too. Something neither of them had anticipated or wanted. It happened in stolen moments. Dante's hand lingering a second too long when he passed Damian a document. The way Damian's eyes tracked Dante across a room during meetings. The accidental brush of shoulders that neither pulled away from as quickly as they should have. March brought a business trip to the coast. A weekend at a compound overlooking the ocean, meetings with allied families. They shared a suite. 2 rooms, 1 common area. Professional. Appropriate. Except Dante couldn't sleep, and found Damian on the balcony at 2 a.m., watching the waves crash against the rocks below. They talked for hours. About everything and nothing. About the weight of expectations and the impossibility of choice. About who they might have been in another life, one where their last names didn't define their destinies. When Dante shivered in the ocean breeze, Damian draped his jacket over his shoulders without thinking. When their eyes met, there was a question in the air neither was ready to ask. But they stood there, closer than business partners, closer than reluctant allies, teetering on the edge of something that could destroy them both. Back in the city, they couldn't ignore it anymore. The electricity when they were in the same room. The way Dante's focus shattered when Damian walked in wearing a particular suit. The protective fury that consumed Damian when someone disrespected Dante in a meeting. They were falling. Fast and reckless and completely forbidden. Because loving your enemy in their world wasn't romantic. It was dangerous. It was weakness. It was ammunition for anyone who wanted to exploit it. The families were watching. Always watching. Dante's father pulled him aside, warned him that business was business, that whatever he did behind closed doors, he'd better remember where his loyalties lay. Damian's uncle made thinly veiled threats about Corsano manipulation, about the importance of maintaining Volkov interests above all else. They were trapped between desire and duty, between what they wanted and what was expected. Every moment together was borrowed time. Every touch was a risk. Every feeling was a betrayal of everything they'd been raised to believe. But the heart doesn't negotiate. It doesn't respect family trees or criminal empires or decades of bloodshed. In April, during a late-night strategy session in their penthouse, exhausted and running on caffeine and frustration, it finally broke. An argument about nothing that was really about everything. Dante accused Damian of being a coward, of hiding behind his Volkov ice. Damian shot back that Dante was reckless, that his emotions would get them both killed. They were standing too close, voices raised, and then somehow Dante's hand was fisted in Damian's shirt and Damian's fingers were gripping Dante's jaw and the kiss was inevitable. Desperate. Angry. Real. When they broke apart, breathing hard, the world had shifted on its axis. Dante laughed, slightly unhinged. Damian's careful control was shattered. And they both knew there was no going back. What followed was the most dangerous game they'd ever played. Stolen moments became stolen nights. Secret glances in crowded rooms. Text messages in code. They built a world within a world, a relationship hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by the marriage everyone already knew about. But secrets in their world had a shelf life. It was Dante's cousin who noticed first. The way Dante smiled at his phone. The distraction during family dinners. The fact that he actually seemed happy. She didn't report it immediately, but she watched. And she wasn't the only one. Damian's brother saw the changes too. The softness in Damian's eyes when Dante's name was mentioned. The fury when someone suggested the marriage was just for show. The protective instincts that went far beyond business partnership. Both families had accepted the marriage as strategy. But genuine affection, actual love, that was something else entirely. That complicated things. That created vulnerabilities. That made their heirs potentially more loyal to each other than to their own blood. The whispers started in May. Speculation. Suspicion. Both Dante and Damian were called into separate meetings with their families. Questioned. Warned. Reminded of their responsibilities. Dante's father made it clear, the alliance was good for business, but business came first. Always. If he had to choose between Damian and the family, there was only one acceptable choice. Damian's father was more direct, emotion was weakness, love was a luxury, and Volkovs didn't have luxuries. Whatever he felt, he'd better bury it deep. They were being torn apart by the very families who had forced them together. The breaking point came in late June. A rival syndicate, emboldened by rumors of discord, made a major play for Corsano territory. It was a trap, designed to draw Dante out, to eliminate him and fracture the alliance. The intelligence came to Damian first. He had minutes to decide. Follow protocol and report through proper channels, which would take hours Dante didn't have. Or act independently, betray his family's chain of command, and save the man he loved. There was no decision. Not really. Damian mobilized his personal security team, crashed the ambush with Volkov's soldiers, and pulled Dante out of what would have been his grave. The rescue was successful. The message was clear. And every family in the city took note. Damian Volkov had chosen Dante Corsano over protocol. Over chain of command. Possibly over his own family. The fallout was immediate and severe. Both families called emergency meetings. The alliance was in jeopardy. Accusations flew. Trust dissolved. The old wounds, barely scabbed over, ripped open again. Dante's father demanded answers. Damian's father called him a traitor. The marriage, the alliance, everything they'd built over 6 months hung by a thread. In the eye of the hurricane, Dante and Damian faced the impossible choice. They could deny everything, bury their feelings, return to being strangers playing roles. Save the alliance. Protect their families. Live the lives that had been planned for them since birth. Or they could tell the truth. Claim their love publicly. Face the consequences together. And potentially watch everything burn. They met one last time in their penthouse, before the final family summit where decisions would be made. The city lights glittered below them, beautiful and indifferent to their struggle. Dante spoke first. He said he was tired of choosing between love and loyalty. That maybe, just maybe, they could be the ones to prove the choice was false. That their love didn't weaken the alliance, it strengthened it. That two families united not just by strategy but by genuine bond between their heirs could be unstoppable. Damian, ever the pragmatist, laid out the risks. The resistance they'd face. The danger from enemies who'd see their love as weakness. The possibility that their families would reject them both, leaving them with nothing but each other. But he also said something he'd never admitted before. That Dante was the first person who'd ever made him want to choose. That for the first time in his life, he wanted something that wasn't about duty or family or legacy. He wanted Dante. And he was willing to fight for that. The summit was held in the same neutral estate where their engagement had been announced 6 months earlier. Every major player from both families attended. The tension was suffocating. Dante and Damian walked in together. Not as reluctant partners. As united front. They didn't apologize. Didn't beg for understanding. Instead, they presented something neither family expected, results. In 6 months, working together, they'd increased combined revenue by 40%. They'd resolved territorial disputes that had festered for years. They'd earned respect from allied families who'd once dismissed both Corsanos and Volkovs as too busy fighting each other to be relevant. The marriage wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was the foundation of something genuinely powerful. But more than that, they made a promise. They would continue to honor their families, their responsibilities, their legacies. But they would do it together, as genuine partners, not as strangers playing pretend. And if the families couldn't accept that, if blood demanded they choose between love and loyalty, then they would walk away from it all. Together. The silence in that room was deafening. The old patriarchs, men who'd spent decades in power, faced with a scenario they'd never anticipated. Their heirs, calling their bluff. It was Dante's father who spoke first. He said that strength took many forms. That adaptability was what had kept the Corsanos in power for generations. And that maybe, just maybe, these boys had figured out something the old guard had been too stubborn to see. Damian's father took longer. But eventually, with visible reluctance, he acknowledged that results spoke louder than tradition. That their world was changing, and families that didn't change with it went extinct. The alliance would stand. The marriage would continue. And Dante and Damian would lead it, together, on their own terms. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still resistance. Still suspicion from some corners. Still enemies who saw their love as a target. The world they inhabited didn't transform overnight because two people fell in love. But they had each other. And they had something more valuable than their family's grudging acceptance. They had the truth. In the penthouse that night, after everything, they finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding. About what came next. About building a life that was theirs, not just an extension of their family's expectations. Damian admitted he was terrified. That he'd spent his whole life knowing exactly what was expected of him, and now he was in uncharted territory. Dante said that terrified was good. That it meant it mattered. That the only things worth having were the things that scared you. They talked about the future. Not the empire. Not the business. But the small things. Where they wanted to travel. What they wanted to build beyond their family's legacies. Who they wanted to become. And for the first time since they'd been forced together in that frozen January, they kissed not out of desperation or anger or forbidden desire, but out of choice. Out of love. Out of the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other. The city sprawled below them, same as it always had. The criminal underworld continued its dance of power and violence and ambition. But in that penthouse, two enemies who'd become lovers had rewritten the rules. Their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And whatever came next, whatever challenges or threats or obstacles their world threw at them, they would face it together. Because sometimes, love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes, it just gives you a reason to keep fighting. And in their world, that was more than enough. Love in the shadows isn't about grand gestures or perfect endings. It's about choosing each other, again and again, in a world that demands you choose everything else first. Dante and Damian proved that even in the darkest corners of power and legacy, two hearts can find each other and refuse to let go. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful rebellion is simply loving who you're supposed to hate. Sometimes the greatest strength is vulnerability. And sometimes, the family you choose is worth more than the one you're born into.
Hit the subscribe button for more enchanting tales every week. Don't forget to keep the magic alive.